From downtown Milwaukee, welcome to Money Talk with Bob Landis. Each week, professional advisors from Landis & Company Investments discuss the latest financial developments, offering timely insight and long-term perspective.
Welcome to Money Talk for October 25th. Let's check the calendar. Your Milwaukee Bucks have their season home opener at the Fiserv tonight. You can get out of the house and head for the Harvest Fest at the Elegant Farmer locations. And for something a little different, you can take a helicopter tour of the city. That will be some serious leaf peeping from a couple of thousand feet. And don't forget your Green Bay Packers travel to Florida to play Jacksonville this Sunday. Okay, here we go. When you're dropping someone off at the New Zealand airport, you have 3 minutes to say goodbye. 3 minutes. I'm hard-pressed to even call that a quickie. 1,000 years ago in southwest England, someone stashed 2,500 silver coins in a field. Skip ahead 1,000 years. When a man and his metal detector were scanning a field, when the alarm went crazy to this tune of $5.6 million worth of rare ancient coins. I promise I'll never make fun of old men and their metal detectors ever again. Because someday I'll be one. I'm halfway there. All I need is a metal detector. It was recently reported that in the past 12 months, 1,000 shipping containers have fallen overboard and lost in the ocean. Can you imagine how excited the guys are that do magnet fishing? Now on my Christmas list is a metal detector and a magnet fishing pole. And finally, a judge in Greece has imposed a suspended 1-month prison sentence on a man convicted of disturbing his neighbors by repeatedly sneaking into their properties to smell their shoes. He probably thought they smelled like feta. On the podcast today, we have Dave Sandstrom, Kendall Bauer, Joel Drisang, and Kyle Tedding, and we're all here wearing shoes. Kyle?
Thanks, Max. Some good reminders in your open today. Most importantly, I think if you are holding gold and silver coins, burying them in the yard may not be the best way to remember them 1,000 years later. A good market overall this year, but a bit of a mixed market this week. The Nasdaq up just 0.2%, closing at 18,519. The S&P and the Dow, however, down. The S&P down 1%. That's 57 points this week, closing at 5808, and the Dow Jones Industrial average down 1,162 points this week after losing 260 points on Friday, closed the week down 2.7%. For the year, Nasdaq up 24.1, the S&P up 23.1, and the Dow Jones Industrial average up 13.5%. Maybe just a quick look at Treasury yields this week. The benchmark 10-year U.S. Treasury moved from 4.07 up to 4.23, and the shorter 5-year U.S. Treasury up from 3.88 to in the week last week up to 4.05. A little bit of a sign perhaps that markets broadly not seeing quick rate cuts, but certainly still some on the horizon. You know, maybe, Kendall, the place to start is in a bit of a retrospective. We go back to a little more than 2 years ago now, mid-October 2022. It felt pretty bad at the time. We were in the midst of still pretty high inflation, although the Fed had at least been doing what they could to start to get that under control. It feels like now a very different conversation than where we were a little more than 2 years ago.
Yeah, and how far we've come, you know? I mean, at that point was pretty bad, right? Stocks and bonds both having one of the worst years together in decades. But you know, as we told clients and talked to clients, hey, they're starting to see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. And 2 years after the fact, very much the case, right? The S&P, since that point, right around middle of October to today, up right around, if not a little bit over 60% in that time period. So, you know, those that stayed the course, that remember they had a plan and didn't panic have, been rewarded handsomely. And I think, now this week as well, entering in the third year of this bull market, just a reminder that, again, we're long-term investors, right? And sometimes it's hard to remember you have a plan in years like that, but also why we talk about the importance of balance, as we always do. And I think, hey, plenty to be optimistic about moving forward, even in the midst of a volatile political few weeks coming up here.
And Kyle, I think thing that you and Kendall bring to the plate here is also the memory of knowing that bad things do happen, right? As we go through time, you look back over the course of history, we've seen, significant market corrections, but typically they're followed up with some pretty aggressive recoveries. And in most instances, if you're sitting out those months following those deep corrections, you've missed out on a large portion of those recoveries. And I'll tell you what, time in the market and trying to do those types of things can be very, very difficult and very dangerous and ultimately very expensive. So, Kendall, just to step on your comment there and solidify it, is staying put historically has really been the key to surviving those market volatility sessions.
I think that's fair, and amidst what has been a pretty strong run, we've had the occasional step back in the last 2 years, but especially recently, going on more than a month now, you got to go back to the day after the Federal Reserve cut rates in the middle of September to see a day in which we had a 1% move in the market. It's been just an incredible calm stretch for the S&P 500. I think that maybe runs counter to what we're hearing, especially with the political news that's out there, especially with some of the fear-driven advertising that takes place anytime you're in that election season. But of course, I think it's a reminder that more than politics, earnings and interest rates are what drives the market. Even in shorter periods of time, typically we see on the S&P 1 in 5 or more than 1 in 5 days or a 1% move, and to go now more than a month without seeing that kind of volatility, I think it speaks to, Dave, perhaps just how clear investors are on what the Fed has been trying to do. Add in that we've seen an earnings season that continues to look fairly strong with some strong earnings forecasts, and I wouldn't suggest maybe the calmer markets are going to continue forever, but encouraged by the fact that things have been, especially recently, a lot calmer.
And then, Kyle, take a step back and kind of look globally and real big picture. Earlier this week, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, revised their global growth forecasts upward, and in particular, the United States added to their growth forecast. So, coupled with what you're talking about here, with some of the calmness we're seeing, the ability for markets to kind of persevere through a Fed monetary policy change, and then to see that kind of translate into what we're seeing across the world is, I think, encouraging. We do see China continuing to struggle, but now you're seeing India kind of stepping up in a big way and kind of being the global leader in growth numbers. But I think you're going to see, as all central banks continue on this trend of lowering interest rates, it's going to take some pressure off of the emerging world with any kind of debt that's out there. And I think anytime you see positive direction of global growth, I think it bodes well for the U.S. economy.
I think the number the IMF put out for kind of full year 2025 growth of 3.2%, the number itself is almost irrelevant to me, because we're going to be wrong of the 100 plus whatever countries they include in that forecast. We're going to be wrong on all of them. We're not going to have precisely what the rate of growth was in each of those places, but directionally, it's a pretty important conversation to have that, that rate of growth isn't negative globally, and especially here in the U.S., as you said, the IMF's seeing pretty strong growth potential. I think it speaks to a world that, in particular, despite all the uncertainty that's out there and all the war and all the challenges that we still face, that has some opportunity. And when you look at the U.S.'s role in that, we don't export a lot to the rest of the world. On the other hand, we import a ton from everybody else. And so if our foundational kind of economic forecast is, slow growth but growth, well, that helps the rest of the world kind of maybe coalesce around this idea that, we have a consumer to sell to. We have this kind of maybe backdrop for what should be a little bit happier place to be. And of course, it's driven by the American consumer. I joke with clients that the thing we do better than any other country in the world is spend money. You might, assume that historically it's been any variety of other things, but I think especially in the last 15, 20 years, it's that consumption that's been key. And Joel, we look just about every week that we can at what the consumer is feeling, what they're doing. We've got a consumer sentiment number this week that continues to point to a consumer that sees some issues, but improving overall.
Yeah, Kyle, I was looking at the list of the indicators that we followed this week, and that's the only one from October. Everything else is from September, so we can get to that in a little bit. But the consumer sentiment number comes from the University of Michigan. They interview consumers. They've been doing this for years and years, and they do it twice a month, and at the end of the month is the real number. And it came out, and they said for the third month in a row, consumers are feeling better about the economy and their ability to spend money. And as we always repeat, 2/3 of our economic drive is from consumer spending. So all of that is good. Now they're up 40% from 2 years ago when you're talking about 2022 when things looked pretty bleak. Well, that was the lowest point in the long history of this consumer sentiment survey, and they're up 40% from there. And even from a year ago, they're up. But so there are positive things from that. This report from the university also mentioned that there's the specter of the election, that the election looms large, and they've found over the years, more recently, with how partisan our country has become, that a lot of the consumers sort of tie their sentiment and their feeling about spending and what they say toward how they feel about whoever's in the White House. So the university said, whoever wins on November 5th or whenever that's decided, that some of the consumers are going to be changing their sentiment. They're going to feel either worse or they're going to feel a lot better.
Potentially quickly, right? That once we have that answer, you might see a flip and, okay, well, I felt great and now I feel terrible, or vice versa. What I think is interesting in those numbers is just how kind of divided it is, right? That it isn't, 20% is politically motivated and the other 80 isn't. It's really been very much, at least in the data historically, well, if your party's in power, you feel good, and if it isn't, you feel bad. And if as a country we are as split as we have been, then you'll see the flip, but it isn't going to change the underlying number all that much potentially, save for maybe some uncertainty.
Right. It's two things we always point out with this is how fickle consumer sentiment is, and the other is that consumers tend to say one thing and do not necessarily do the same thing. So those who might be disappointed about which party gets in the White House or stays in the White House or whatever, they're going to be spending money regardless. And you made this point at the seminar is, you don't, and Bob was always making this point too, is, if you're going to buy a refrigerator, you're not going to not buy it because of who's in the White House.
In fact, I just had a client tell me that because of a construction screw-up, he had to go from the $5,000 refrigerator to the $13,000 refrigerator. So potentially some opportunities to spend some more, depending on who's in office.
Well, we've certainly seen, Joel, from your the sentiment numbers from the not jiving with the consumer spending numbers, right? We you see people talking and speaking negatively about their finances or the economy, yet the spending hasn't stopped. And that's a diversion from that report over the years. So it is kind of interesting to see somebody answer a survey and say, oh my gosh, everything is terrible, but I'm going to Disney next week.
Right, yeah.
The happiest place on earth, Dave. Where are you going to go when you feel bad?
That's my point. How bad can it be if you're taking the family to Disney?
Maybe working backwards on the economic indicators this week. Also on Friday, we had the durable goods order. Of course, I think fair to point out that of all the big ticket items that tend to show up in that order, probably the most expensive is aircraft, and we've had all kinds of issues with Boeing recently that certainly have weighed on that number. but overall, not a great number for durable goods in September.
No, and that's why I'm pointing out that it was in September, as you said, mid-September, when the Fed started lowering interest rates, which was meant to, sort of give a kickstart to the economy, saying, hey, maybe we had rates too high for a while and things are slowing down, so we need to get things going again. Well, this is September. That didn't take effect yet. So a lot of these numbers, the durable goods numbers, they were down for the third time in 4 months. They were down on a year-to-year basis. If you take out commercial aircraft and transportation orders in general, it looks a little bit better, but it's still pretty weak for the manufacturing sector. But we're also seeing that with some of the other numbers this week, the existing home sales from the National Association of Realtors, the new home sales from the Department of Commerce. Both of those are showing continued weakness in the housing sector, and again, to the degree that lower interest rates, thanks to the Fed lowering rates, that's not showing up yet.
And then we've got the September Conference Board survey of leading economic indicators, maybe kind of putting a cap on, all right, what do we see? And again, this goes back to where we were maybe looking ahead a month ago. So we're into some of it now, but some signs of decline there as well.
Right, and they're looking at numbers in September again, right? So, what they saw was that things were getting worse from August. So maybe it's a good sign that the timing might have been right for the Fed to start lowering rates.
Yeah, I think that's the case. And of course, the challenge we face with lower rates is that we don't feel it right away. That if you're a home buyer, you're not buying a home every month. And so you're not going to care about interest rates for another couple of years if that's the next time you're in the market. If you're building a piece of property, plant, and equipment as a manufacturing company, well, the only time you're looking to borrow for that property, plant, and equipment is, when it's time to build it. And if you're not in the market for that right now, you're not looking at rates as closely. And so I think it will take more time to really digest what the initial set of cuts has done, just like the Fed's going to continue to digest how much more needs to be done along the way. We've got a couple more decision points here before the end of the year from the Fed. Plenty of opportunity next year to see rates come down a little more if that's where things need to go. And so I think, you kind of think through, well, it's been calm since the Fed cut. It doesn't mean it's going to stay calm forever, but I think it's a nice signal to the Fed that for now the market has responded pretty favorably to the path. The communication has been good. It doesn't mean the soft landing is guaranteed, but it certainly helps. With that, we enjoy doing the program for you. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you for listening to Money Talk with Bob Landis. If you have a financial question you want answered on next week's show, email it to moneytalk@landis.com. To keep informed throughout the week, visit our Money Talk page at landis.com.